What is trauma?
In a home where one of the parents has experienced substance abuse.
To reduce the childhood trauma, is there anything the parents can do?
And so a trauma can be created,
Or it doesn't really matter, it's mostly based on that person's coping mechanism?
if you see the cup half full, that means
Is there any correlation between optimism and resilience?
a hurdle becomes a wall.
How can the parent help their kid become more resilient?
Well, first you have to be honest with yourself.
Luisa, when researching about you, I noticed you spend a considerable amount of time helping trauma victims. What is trauma? And how can we truly help someone heal after they've been through an extremely psychological event or situation?
Yeah, well, a trauma comes from the Greek word, and it means wound. And a trauma is a wound that has been impacting our lives or that we experience. And when we talk about trauma, we talk about there's like three different types of trauma. Acute trauma, which means like one single event, like a car accident or something environmental, like an earthquake or things like that. And so that would be an acute trauma. And then we have chronic trauma, which is ongoing trauma, like growing up in a home where one of the parents has experienced substance abuse or bullying, like ongoing bullying. And then we come to complex trauma, which is when someone has experienced more than one type of trauma, like sexual abuse, domestic violence, substance abuse, or another stressful event. And so a trauma can be created by one single stressful event, or it can be created by ongoing stressful events. And so the impact, well, now we have more information, right? In the 90s, the CDC and Kaiser did a study, and they found that it was an adverse childhood experiences study, and they found the impact that childhood trauma has in later life. And so now we find that experiencing childhood adversity, like sexual abuse, like a parent experiencing substance use, so emotional neglect. If one of your parents is addicted to a drug or alcohol, they're not present. So what does that mean? That means that adult is not able to provide the emotional support that you need when you're growing up. And so experiencing one or more stressful events is highly, highly linked with physical problems later in life, like heart attacks, cancer, and so it affects your physical health, and it also impacts your emotional health. And so when it comes to the emotional part, then we found that early childhood adversities, so early childhood traumas, makes you more likely to suffer from depression, suffer from anxiety, misuse drugs, alcohol, and also get, you're more likely to get or do risk behaviors like sex, right? Or like harming yourself, or just things that are going to be more risk-taking. Okay, so we now know that the impact of trauma is great, and it impacts the rest of our lives, right? And it also affects your relationships, the way you view the world.
To reduce the childhood trauma, is there anything the parents can do to reduce it?
Well, to reduce the impact of childhood trauma, yes. So by providing boundaries, sometimes when something stressful happens to a child, like a parent finding out that the child has been sexually abused, parents tend to compensate. And so sometimes because they know that they've been harmed, they try to maybe be overprotective, or they try to overindulge the child to sort of compensate for the harm that the child has gone through. And in fact, that ends up harming the child, because the child needs to learn appropriate boundaries. So it's always good to have, consequences, and also to provide the balance and the structure that the child needs. And so by doing that, you provide safety and security to the child. And you show to the child that I'm here to protect you. And so, yeah, it's important, that a parent provides soothing and provides boundaries to the child. And that there's also communication, right? Because sometimes parents try to avoid topics that may be linked to the trauma, whatever it was. And so it's important there's conversations, especially if the child has questions or brings up the topic. Sometimes parents say like, oh, don't think about it. Or, let's not talk about that. It's the opposite. You should talk about it if a child's bringing it up, or if you're seeing behaviors that are affecting the child.
I read an article that stated some of the trauma victims usually end up with PTSD. What percentage is it, or why is that?
So I'm not sure about the percentage, but not everyone ends up with PTSD, right? PTSD, so you can experience trauma and complex trauma and not experience PTSD. So, but what it is, what we do know, if it develops PTSD, and PTSD includes symptoms like flashbacks, right? Like reliving the trauma of the event, or avoidance, or disassociation, like or numbing of emotions. And so all those things, if you have all those things, then it would be very, very important to seek professional help. But I mean, regardless, if you experience trauma, it would be important to seek professional help. So what it is, it does impact you emotionally. And so what I've seen is that more than PTSD, people may develop depression, people may develop anxiety, and those are more common. Or people may develop an addiction to substance use, right? And so, or addiction to sex, or, so it just depends on the person.
I see. Is there any data that what type of trauma usually end up as PTSD? Or it doesn't really matter, it's based on that person's coping mechanism?
I think it's most likely based on protective factors. And when we talk about protective factors, is basically, is at what age did the crime occurred, right? And how are you viewing yourself? Like, what's your perception of how it happened, what happened, and your reactions, right? So if you have more protective factors, like a community, people you can trust, people you can talk to, or a faith, right? That could be a protective factor. Then maybe you have more weapons to fight the enemy, right? Versus if you don't have protective factors, or if you experience childhood trauma and then suddenly you experience one acute incident of being in a horrible car accident, maybe that's going to be the last drop that's going to spill the cup, and then that's going to unleash all this, symptoms related to anxiety or to trauma.
By faith, do you mean religions?
Yeah, faith in higher power or community. Yes.
How is that helpful? Is it because the person think that someone else is going to take care of their problems? Yes,
it's the belief, right? The belief, and also if you're a person of faith, you're most likely to have a community, right? Have support with other people, talk, prayers together, right? So that brings community and it brings hope. And so it can be a protective factor.
What about resilience? Does it play any role in the coping mechanism or in the healing process?
Of course, yes. Resilience, is the moving forward, right? Like the adapting to challenging situations, right? That's resilience. And so I think in my opinion, resilience is it comes together with attachment, meaning like how you grew up in your early childhood years, right? If you grew up in a home where you saw resilience, where you saw parents seeing cup half full, and so I think resilience is how you grew up, so shaped by your environment. And then I also think like genetics have something to do with it, right? There's some people that are just a little more positive and more into like, yep, I can do anything I want to do. And then there's some people that are like, no, the world's a horrible place, right? But that's basically shaped in our early childhood experiences.
So resilience is adapting, recovering, and growing from the situation.
Yes.
So how can we strengthen our resilience? Is there a process that a person can follow?
I think it's something that is shaped as you live life, and it could be strengthened in a good way, or it can be impacted in a negative way. So something that you can do to strengthen your resilience, or people can do, is like engage in little hobbies, right? And so the more you have the opportunity of accomplishing something good, right? Then you feel like, oh, I can do that, right? Or if it's, if it's just choosing, when your friends get together and they ask you, what do you want to eat? Don't say whatever. Choose. Make something, right? And so by then you're making choices and you're strengthening your decision making. And by that, when the big problems come, you're more, you feel more confident to make decisions, right? And so I think that by, choosing things or things you want to do, and then also, creating or making little hobbies,
I see. And should the hobbies be challenging, or it doesn't really matter?
Start with little ones. Like, if you've never taken a walk and now you're like, oh, I want to, do a 2-mile hike, then do that 2-mile hike, right? Or if you want to learn how to make a cup, right? So take a pottery class. And if you feel like, so something that that is going to make you feel accomplished and that is going to boost your confidence.
I see. What about optimism? Is there any correlation between optimism and resilience?
Well, if you're optimistic, that means that you're more likely to continue, right? Working on your goals. And so if you see the cup half full, that means you're optimistic, right? But if you see the cup half empty, that means you're not. And I think that has to do with attachment and how you learn to view the world. So if you learn that the world is a safe place and the world offers opportunities, and you heard or you saw your parents being optimistic and not giving up, that's what you're learning, right? But if you're learning that the world is unsafe, the world is not a good place to be in, and everything is against you, that's really how you're shaping your view of the world. And so then the link is that if you're seeing things, you're seeing it through your perspective, right? And so if you're trying to become more resilient and be more optimistic, then it would be important to do some internal work and finding out what you have to work on to get there.
You said, taking classes like pottery or going on a walk is going to increase resilience. But what about school or workplaces? Do they have any impact on fostering resilience?
Of course, yes. Because if you're taking classes and you're getting good grades, how are you going to feel? Accomplished, right? Good. Yeah. But if you start failing classes and not doing well, how does that make you feel?
Bad,
right? And so, yes, school can be a good place to practice and foster resilience, and people with, healthy, emotional intelligence, and they tend to perseverate, right? They tend to be determined, and they don't see. If there's a challenge, they don't see it as this is the end of the world. They just see it as like, oh, it's a hurdle and I'm going to keep going. Versus people who have like low self-esteem and maybe are pessimistic, then a hurdle becomes a wall, right? And they see it as like, this is it. This is the end of the world. They may have more difficulties accomplishing goals.
What about in children? I mean, you can have a kid, especially nowadays, just get out of the house and go for a walk or take a pottery class and all. How can the parent help their kid become more resilient?
Yeah, by allowing them to make choices, right? Like by allowing them to choose haircuts, by allowing them to choose clothing, by allowing them to choose maybe little, if they're not going to decide on the restaurant, choose your meal. And parents can give options if they don't, right? Like if they think, well, my child is going to choose French fries all the time and I don't want him to choose French fries, then give the child two options and say you can either eat fish or you can eat chicken. Those are the two options. And then the child practices decision making, right? And the same, allowing the child, not forcing the child to do hobbies that they don't want to do. If they hate baseball, and they want to do theater, then allow the child to practice or do something that they really want to do.
Well, how can parents know that their kids like something and hate something else? Because kids might want to hide it from their parent because
they don't want to disappoint, or maybe
exactly, yeah. I
think by just seeing their reactions when it's time to go do that activity, right? If it's like you're dragging the child, or the child is not coming up with excuses not to go to that, and then you have to ask questions.
Resilience and emotional well-being, they're very interconnected. But is there a correlation between resilience and emotional intelligence?
Yes, of course. Like I was saying, people with emotional intelligence means what? That you're able to understand emotions, right? That you also have self-regulation, like you're able to manage your own emotions, that you're empathic, which means that you're able to consider other people's perspectives. So you're flexible, right? You can adjust and you can put other people's glasses or put yourself in their shoes. And so it includes all of those. And so if you have emotional intelligence, then that means that you're probably more likely to adjust, right? That you're more flexible, right? Just like physical health and emotional health, very similar. If I have good physical health, I'm most likely flexible, right? Yeah. And so I can bend, I can, stretch. And so the same with emotional intelligence. If you're able to adjust to problems, adjust to situations, adjust to your partner, then you're more likely to be more emotionally intelligent. And then that also is linked to just being more resilient, right? Because you're able to adjust to challenges and you're able to move forward and just see hurdles, not walls. And so people without emotional intelligence or without or low resilience are more rigid. And so they are not able to adjust. They have more challenges adjusting to situations, adjusting to partners. And so
is there a technique to manage some of the intense emotional states for the people who are not as emotionally intelligent as others?
Yeah. The first step is awareness. You have to be aware of your own emotions. And for that, I always say sometimes it's good to sit down and write it down. Like just write it down. Get a notebook, a journal, and write down your emotions. If you're having a difficult time identifying your emotions, and online you can figure out Wheel of Emotions. There's all these charts and you can really identify, right? Because sometimes we just tend to stick with anger or sadness, but I think anger is more common. And so then we have to slice it thin and really get to the root of those emotions. And so it would be important to first identify for yourself, right? And that way you can express it in a way that is going to connect appropriately, right? And in a way that's going to bring connection. And sometimes, most of the time we women, we want to talk. And so I think by writing it it also helps you keep it together. And the guys tend to be the opposite. They don't want to talk about emotions. And so by writing it, you kind of force yourself to, talk about them. Yeah. So I think it helps.
Well, what about the instances that something happens, we get angry? How do we control that state? We can't have a notebook every time we're mad and write it down.
Yeah. Well, so first, right, the emotions come from the brain, right, from the amygdala. And so it's a whole physiological reaction, right? When we get triggered with big emotions, that means there's like a lot of adrenaline and cortisol running through our bodies. And so what you need to end, because there's so many hormones going and pumping, then what does the heart start doing? It starts beating fast, right? And so that's why sometimes when we're upset and we feel our heart beating fast or scared, right? There's all the hormones. And so then we want to go on fight or flight mode, right? Yeah. And so that's what you're talking about. So what you can do is slow down, right? So take deep breaths. The common, we've heard it all. But you should practice it. Take a deep breath in, hold it, and breathe out slowly, like if you were blowing candles. And so by doing that, then the brain starts getting more oxygen, right? And then you can think a little more clearly, right? So take 5 deep breaths, and your heart, only your heart rate. I feel my heart rate, right? Like, I don't know what your heart rate is like right now, but if I'm feeling my heart beating too fast, I have to slow it down. And so take a deep breath. And then when it's a little more calm and it has almost normal, back to normal, then make a decision or say something, right? But it should be about your emotions, and it should be something other than anger.
So breathing is the best way when it comes to those situations then? Yes.
And I mean, everybody is different, but usually anger is felt here. And so you can always, do something a little more physical, like, and then relaxing. And that way the energy, just the energy is just being released. The tension is being released from your body, taking deep breaths, drinking a glass of cold water, something that can get your body back to normal.
I see. Does emotional intelligence play any role in self-discipline or vice versa?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Emotional intelligence has to do with self-esteem and also with just if you have emotional intelligence, you're most likely to have a high self-esteem. You're most likely to persevere, be determined to continue goals, professional goals, to be willing to, like I said, adjust and view the world in a more positive way, and also view others in a more positive manner instead of thinking that person wants to hurt you or harm you. You're more likely to think it was unintentional, or he or she didn't mean to. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think the hardest part when it comes to self-discipline is to stay motivated. Mm-hmm. Yeah, where does motivation come from? Is it? I mean, my question is mostly, let's say when we start a project, we're halfway through.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden the motivation is gone.
Yeah. Well, motivation comes from emotional regulation, right? So if I'm having a hard time accomplishing goals, it doesn't come from I'm lazy. It comes from I'm not able to manage my emotions. And so you have to stop and think. It can go deeper. If I accomplish this goal, first, is it a goal that I'm putting myself, or is it a goal that someone else told me I have to do, right? It's not the same as I'm going to work on organizing my room because that's my decision versus my spouse is telling me every day that I need to organize my room, right? So it depends. But if I'm not able to set a boundary with myself, that has to do with emotional regulation, right? And so it could be from not feeling good enough to feel accomplished, right? It could be self-sabotaging, like you're always self-sabotaging yourself by not accomplishing. And then it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Everybody tells you you're scattered. Everybody tells you you never finish projects. Everybody tells you. So then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and you do it. Or is it coming from if I do this, right? If my wife has been telling me to do this, it's like, I don't want to do it because then I'm doing something against my will. And then it's a power issue within the dynamic of the relationship. So it all depends where it's, where the goal is coming from. But yes, motivation and being able to accomplish goals comes from self-regulation.
Is emotional intelligence connected to charisma in any way?
Charisma in the sense of like how you're liked? Or
in the sense of how a person or a person's impression, I guess, on other people?
How you're coming across to other people? As long as it's the same, right? Like, because there's people that are very charismatic and well liked, but in private, they're not someone you would want next to you, right? So as long as I think there is a link if it's across the board, if that is who you are and you are a positive person, right? Something charismatic is a positive person, is someone that you want to be around with. And so if those are true traits of your personality, and you're not faking it, then yes, because you're most likely to be someone that is optimistic, right? Someone that views the cup half full.
I see. When it comes to emotional intelligence and regulating, is there anything that you recommend anyone to read to become better at managing it?
To read, to get better about emotional regulation.
Yeah.
I think if they have experienced trauma, right? Since we started with the topic of trauma, if you've experienced trauma, then you're more likely to have challenges with emotional intelligence, right? With self-regulation. You might be empathic, but maybe there's things that you're going to be missing. So to start with that, then I would recommend The Body Keeps the Score, so that you understand the effects of trauma, because sometimes they're not overly tangible, like you can't see them. Sometimes they're internal reactions. And so I think that would be good. For emotional intelligence, I don't think I have a book. Let me think about it, okay? Mm-hmm. And then
no worries,
I'll send it to you.
Yeah. When it comes to in-person relationships, does emotional intelligence plays any role?
Oh, yes, of course. Like, yes, people that are, if you're not emotionally intelligent, right, then you're more rigid. And what is a relationship requires adjustments, right? Like you adjust to a partner adjusts to you. And so you tend to be more rigid. And so if you're more rigid, then you're more like my way or the highway, or it's just but what I need, right? Instead of more adjusting. And so it can create conflict.
How can we improve our how can we improve our communication skill with our significant other?
Well, first you have to be honest with yourself, right? Sometimes in relationships, people don't validate their own feelings, or when I say don't validate their own feelings, they don't talk about their feelings, right? They suck it up, right? They keep it to themselves, or they just stop talking to the person, right? And or they'll joke about it. So you're being passive aggressive. And so what's important is that you recognize, the self-awareness, like that you recognize how you're feeling, that you recognize your emotions, and that you're able to express them to partner, right? This is how I'm feeling. And then partner, hopefully is listening and it provides comfort to the other person. And if the partner is not understanding, then you need to continue having the conversation until partner understands. And if partner can't give what you're looking for, then you have to tell them, like, this is what I want to hear from you, or this is what I want to see, because then it comes how we were raised, right? How we're managing emotions. And so partner is not us. And sometimes we get into like, oh, he should know, she should know what I want, or he should know what to say. No, they don't. So no mind reading, no assuming. Don't be, sometimes couples say like, I just look at his face or at her face and I know what he's thinking. No, you don't. We don't know. We don't have that power. So have conversations and then trust, right? Because sometimes couples say like, no, that's not how you feel, right? Don't minimize the other person's experience. Be curious about it. It's not a debate. It should be a conversation. So not minimizing emotions. If your partner's, hopefully you're being honest with yourself. If you say you're not angry, it should be because you're not angry. If you're angry, then you need to say you're angry. And so being honest, right? And partner should trust that you're being honest, if you're being honest.
Then the question is, how can we become better listeners?
By listening.
Well, that's one of the things. I mean, being effective listener, I guess it's good.
Well, because sometimes couples, they listen to have a comeback, like to just say something else. No, if they say like, well, I'm feeling alone. Oh, but you make me feel this way, right? So I just listen to attack back. And that's not the whole point of communicating. The whole point of communicating is connecting through emotions. If you're also feeling lonely or alone, then you can say that. You could say, I feel the same way. So listen to have a conversation. You can be curious about, if you don't understand why that person is feeling the way they're feeling, then ask questions to understand. Put yourself in, empathize. So put yourself in your partner's shoes and see where they're coming from. And if you're also feeling a certain way, then express it.
Yeah, you said some people listen to
have a comeback.
Yeah, to have a comeback.
Yeah, to debate.
Yeah, but how can we, let's say, give a feedback to our partner without having to have an argument? Is there a way that we can soften the blow, or whatever that thing is that we don't want that person to do, saying it in a better way so that we don't create an argument?
Yeah. Yeah, if you create an argument, then you already missed each other, right? So you should pause that argument because you're already missing each other. So yes, you could say if a partner said something that was hurtful, right? Or that you feel like, oh, that got to me, then first wait and repeat what you said. I heard you say that I always forget to pick up the trash. And just make sure that you're, just repeat, simple, just repeat what you heard, because first we want to make sure you're really hearing what partner wanted to say, right? Because sometimes one person says white and the other one hears black. And so just to make sure, just repeat it, right? And then once that person says, yes, I said, I always, you always forget to pick up the trash, right? And then you say, well, the way you said it, it makes me feel like, and then you say the feeling, right? Or the way you said it sounded condescending. And that's hurtful.
So I guess it's more about open communication. If you don't like something, just say it.
Yeah, but in a way that's going to bring connection, right? Because it would be different. Like, hey, don't talk to me like that. Oh, and, it started on something else, right? So you want to really have, direct communication, express how you're feeling, and then hopefully partner will reciprocate, right? And hopefully then partner will say, oh, that was not my intention. I was just frustrated or whatever.
Yeah, where does frustration come from?
Well, I mean, it could be, just different different. I mean, he could have had a stressful day at work, right? But so it just depends if it's a pattern, right? If it's something like you come home stressed every day and you don't want to talk to your wife, that's going to create a conflict, right? At some point. And so if you have a stressful job and you need a transition to, you just need 20 minutes to quiet, to just like get back to yourself, that would be putting a self boundary, right? With yourself and saying like, I'm going to take 20 minutes and I'm just going to rest and it'll be quiet and then I'll come out and then I'll talk. Then it's different, right? Then every day is the same. And now you don't want to talk. You don't want to talk all evening, right? That's going to end up impacting the relationship. So it's different if it's work-related stress, or is it that you're upset that you're home now and now you feel overwhelmed at home, right? So it can come from the relationship or life, work, the relationship, right? Family.
Well, if that constantly happens, is that a toxic relationship or not really?
I mean, if it's not creating, I mean, you have to sit down and think if it is a toxic relationship and that's why you're feeling overwhelmed, then maybe it would be time to talk to a professional about it, right? Or if you're sharing it with friends, like what's happening and it's a toxic relationship, and every time you come home, you feel overwhelmed. Like, is it the relationship or is it the situation? Is it that you feel overwhelmed because you have 3 little kids running around and your wife needs help? Well, yeah, that's a reality, right? She needs help. The kids need help. They don't stop. And so you do need to put you do need to be a father too, right? And so is it life? Is it the relationship? Or is it that maybe you're not putting your best, you're not saving anything for your family. You're giving everything at work and not giving the best version of yourself to your close ones.
What are some of the important components of a relationship? Is it loyalty, communication, intimacy, general romance? What is it?
Yeah, I think loyalty. I think trust. I think respect. And yes, intimacy. Couples that are in long-term relationships and that report to be happy in long-term relationships, they also report to have a good sex, being happy with their sex lives with their partners. So intimacy is an important role for couples.
On our podcast, we have a tradition where we ask a last question from our guest. And the question is, if you could impart one piece of knowledge to the world, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say that the way you perceive the world is shaped by your early childhood experiences, by the way you were raised, by genetics, and by just the relationships that you had in the past, and not just intimate relationships, but interpersonal relationships. And so that it would be important to keep that into consideration when you're experiencing stressful events, or when you're just in relationships, or when you're experiencing the world, because the lens that you're seeing it from may not be the reality, right? May not be accurate, or may not be the way other people are portraying it. So it would be important to, to practice empathy, and then to really think if your reactions to things are, and they're most likely linked to how you were raised. And so it's important to stop and think before you react.
Thank you for coming, Luisa.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.